Okay, so if you're a parent to a teenager, you already know. It can be confusing, frustrating, and, yeah, pretty wonderful all at the same time. But let's be honest, when the eye-rolling starts and the arguments kick in, it's really easy to just wonder what on earth is going on in their head. Well, let's dive in and actually unpack the science behind all of it.
And that brings us to the big question, right? When your teen is acting out, are you dealing with a character flaw? Are they just being rude or selfish? Or is something else entirely at play here? We're going to explore this idea that maybe, just maybe, these behaviors aren't what they seem. They're actually signs of a brain that isn't broken. It's just being built.
Yeah. Does this slide look a little too familiar? The constant sass, the bedroom that looks like a disaster zone, the endless debates over the simplest rules. These are the classics, right? The greatest hits of teenage behavior. And look, if this is your life right now, you are so not alone. And it's not a sign that you're failing as a parent. In fact, this is all incredibly common.
So with that in mind, it's time to bust a huge myth, this whole idea of the bad teenager. Let's take a look at why these behaviors aren't just about defiance or disrespect.
This is really the most crucial point right here. It's not about their character, it's about their biology. The teenage brain is going through a massive renovation, a total rewiring that's second only to the crazy growth it went through when they were a baby. So try to think of it less like a finished product with flaws and more like a construction site with all the dust and loud noises that come with it.
So let's put on our hard hats and take a look inside that construction zone. What is actually happening in the teenage brain that can cause so much chaos on the outside?
Okay, so meet the main character in our story, the adolescent reward system. It's centered in a part of the brain called the striatum, and it is just swimming in dopamine, that feel-good chemical. This system is basically the engine for motivation, for feeling good, and for, well, big emotional responses. And here's the kicker. During the teen years, this system gets totally supercharged. It develops way, way faster than the parts of the brain responsible for impulse control, the brakes.
Now, what's really interesting is that scientists had two competing ideas about this. Was the teen brain hypo-responsive, meaning underactive? Did teens need bigger and bigger thrills just to feel something? Or was it hyper-responsive, overactive, making them extra sensitive to every single win, loss, and social interaction? Well, the evidence is really pointing to that second theory. It's a hyper-responsive system. Everyday emotions just feel bigger, a lot bigger.
And this quote from counselor Emma Page just hits the nail on the head. Feelings are bigger than the skills available to manage them. Think about that. Their emotional hardware gets this major upgrade, but the software for managing those huge feelings? It's still in beta testing. And that gap is exactly where all the drama, the mood swings, and the intense reactions come from. So, if you remember just one thing about the teen brain, let it be this metaphor. You have an engine with a powerful, super sensitive gas pedal that is just hungry for rewards, new experiences, and social connection. But the braking system, the part responsible for thinking ahead and controlling impulses, is still being installed. This mismatch explains so much, from impulsive decisions to risk-taking.
But of course, brain chemistry isn't the whole story. A teenager isn't just a walking brain. They're a whole person living in a really complex world. So what else is influencing their behavior?
We can really break these influences down into two big categories. You've got intrinsic factors, which is all the stuff happening inside them, and then you have extrinsic factors, which are all the pressures coming from the world around them, and both play a huge role.
Let's look at their internal world first. They're dealing with massive hormonal shifts that directly impact their mood. They can be physically and mentally exhausted from school and just from the sheer effort of growing. And with all the physical changes happening, is it any wonder they become hyper-focused on how they look? What we might see as laziness could very well just be sheer exhaustion.
And then there's the outside world. The pressure from school, the constant social navigation with friends, the family dynamic at home, it all has an impact. One of our sources pointed out that many parents are great at providing the basics, but sometimes forget that emotional attention is just as vital. And in our digital age, the constant input from screens can also be incredibly overwhelming for a brain that's still developing.
So this brings us to maybe the most important question for any parent. How do you know when these behaviors are a normal part of growing up and when they might signal something more serious, like depression?
It can be incredibly difficult to tell typical teenage moodiness apart from a genuine mental health struggle. The line can feel so blurry, but there are some key differences to look for.
Look at this comparison. The key difference here is all about patterns, not single incidents. Typical teen moodiness comes and goes. A warning sign, though, is a persistent sadness or loss of interest that just doesn't lift. Arguing is normal. Completely withdrawing from friends and family is a red flag. A messy room is classic, but a consistent decline in personal hygiene could signal a problem. You're looking for behaviors that are intense, that happen most days, and that last for weeks or even months.
And this is absolutely crucial. If you see those persistent warning signs, or if you are ever worried about your teen's safety or any thoughts of self-harm, your first step is to seek help. In the U.S., you can call or text the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline at 988 for immediate confidential support. Please trust your gut.
So, knowing all of this, the brain science, the internal and external pressures, what does it actually mean for you as a parent? Well, it means your job is changing. This slide right here nails the transition you have to make. You're shifting from being a manager of behavior or a controller to being a builder of skills. You're becoming their coach. Your new role isn't just to manage their behavior, but to help them build the skills they still lack, like emotional regulation, planning, and empathy. You're coaching them for adulthood.
And that brings us to our final thought. The next time you're faced with an eye roll or a slammed door, what if you saw a brain under construction instead of just an act of defiance? If you made that one single mental shift, what one thing about your response would you change? Maybe even tonight.